I just don't think we can move forward without accountability because there's so many questions that are left. And frankly, there are a lot of people who are responsible for terrible, terrible decisions who are now, talking heads on TV. I think we are in the process of a once in a generation upheaval, maybe more than that. Historical changes are happening. Old partnerships are breaking, new partnerships are happening. Old power structures are going away, new ones are emerging, and a lot of people are struggling to figure that out. Where are we in all of this? Passwords are no longer relevant. When you have AI, you have machine versus machine. If you have one machine that's quantum and one that's not, it's no contest.
Welcome to Discourse with Christian. I'm your host, Christian White, and today's guest is Simone Ledeen. Simone is a national security leader with 20 plus years of global experience in defense, intelligence, and emerging tech. A former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for the Middle East, she now serves as Managing Director at Vantage ROI, where she helps shape strategic advantage at the intersection of risk, technology, and national security. Simone, thanks so much for being on the show today.
Thanks very much for having me.
Would love to start off asking you, what's your current take on the current geopolitical situation globally, kind of like on a macro level, if you care to share?
I think we are in the process of a once in a generation upheaval, maybe more than that. Historical changes are happening. Old partnerships are breaking, new partnerships are happening. Old power structures are going away, new ones are emerging, and a lot of people are struggling to figure that out. Where are we in all of this? We being, having many hats. So, it's a really, really interesting time. And as I've heard people say, may be cursed to live in interesting times. And we certainly are. It's a period where it's just very hard to predict what's going to happen long term. I think right now, very few people, if any, can predict what will happen long term. And I think the best we can do is to understand where we are. Maybe that will help us to better see what's coming. But I think surprises are ahead.
Would you say it's kind of at a level more or less of the 1960s or 1980s, or could you make kind of like a comparison to a similar period that you care
I
to
think there
reference?
are elements. I think there are elements here. I mean, right now, so I think the U.S. traditionally and still has been and still is sort of a center right country. We have very strong voices on the far left and the far right now that are sort of pulling. And it's interesting, they're meeting in certain places now as well. They've gone kind of full circle in our meeting. But America remains center right. And as much teeth gnashing as that statement may bring, it's true. And so I think there are elements of this protest, the 60s protest movements, but I believe that a lot of the protest movements we've been seeing the last few years are much better organized and much better funded, and potentially even not funded from the United States, from US based groups. Because, in my opinion, a lot of them they're anti-American. They're just straight up anti-American, and it seems like it's in the best interest of some of our adversaries to be fueling some of this. So uh, I have the opportunity to talk to a lot of different kinds of people, and I like to ask questions back. And to me, one of the most important questions right now about this place in history for us in the U.S. is, is this an organic protest movement, like what we're seeing, for example, what we saw previously, the George Floyd riots, and now what we're seeing on university campuses and elsewhere with the quote unquote pro-Palestine movement, which is actually pro, radical Islam, pro, we see terrorist flags, ISIS flags and Taliban flags that are being carried at some of these rallies. So um, I think a lot of people we're seeing similar things play out, or at least the images seem to be similar. I wish there people would think a little bit more critically about reasons for some of this. Why is this happening now? How does this make any sense? I was actually pleased to see the results of an investigation that came out earlier this week about protests that started on October 8th, pro Hamas protests that started on October 8th, 2023. And it's actually turned out that they are funded by Hamas, and so this was part of their operation, and it's still ongoing. So I think there are elements of the '60s in that, just the fact that there are big, loud protests in the streets, protests in universities, and violence on university campuses. But I think the genesis of it can be traced to different sources, and I think it's important to note that. But I would also like to add that some of those protests in the '60s were actually fueled by the Soviets and by the Communist Party, fueled by the Soviet Union, and so we're seeing some of that, maybe funds coming from different sources. Obviously, the Soviet Union no longer exists, but it's sure great for our adversaries to try to turn Americans against each other. And so I hope, in the next few years, we'll enter a period of economic prosperity like the '80s. That would be wonderful. Um, I would love to see that, and I think we'll know sooner rather than later if this big bet that the current administration has taken will work out or not. And I'm talking about the tariffs. Sorry, that
Gotcha.
yeah, that were just announced yesterday. Yeah.
Do you have any comments on those that you'd like to share or anything of that nature?
I mean, I'm watching like everybody else. That's all I can say. I have investments like everybody else. I'm a hopeful. Yeah, I would like the United States to what did the president say yesterday? Make America wealthy again. Like yes, I would like that. And so I'm rooting for us, but it sure is a big gamble, and I hope it works out. I don't know. I don't know what else to say. I don't have any deep thoughts about it. I'm not an economist, and macroeconomics was one of my worst subjects during my MBA. So before I get myself in trouble, I'll stop talking.
Gotcha. And then as it relates to, I mean, obviously your background is in particularly in the Middle East. Would you say that that's the most alarming area, like geopolitically, so to speak, or do you feel like there's other powder kegs, whether that's in Asia or with the whole Russia Ukraine thing going on?
I think there's immediate challenges in the Middle East, but I think Israel has really changed the dynamic there. You know, the threat of Iran and its proxies was so tremendous when I was in government, most recently, and now Iran is almost defanged. I mean, they have sorry, I'm excuse me. So Israel took out several of Iran's terrorist proxies. A lot of the majority of the capabilities we always thought resided in Lebanon with Hezbollah, and their kind of rocket production and their rocket storage facilities and Um, those, to a great extent, no longer exist thanks to the success of Israeli operations, both military operations and intelligence operations. And they really masterfully kind of combined intel and military operations to great success. Um, just I admire those operations so much, and I'm also sort of jealous because wow. But it also changed the calculus. So then, Iran tried to attack Israel with all those, ballistic missiles and drones, and failed spectacularly, to Iran's great embarrassment. And then Israel took out Iran's air defense system, which remains in shambles. So it's pretty much open season on Iran now, on the Iranian regime, if Israel wants to deal the death blow. And obviously, there are operations underway right now in Yemen that we've undertaken, that CENTCOM's undertaken, and they've just been pounding the Houthis, which is another Iranian terror proxy. So the calculus has changed with all of these groups, defanged. You still obviously have Quds Force, and this sort of looming threat of a potential nuclear Iran, which President Trump has said will never be. Um, we'll see how that plays out. But so I would have answered your question before. I would have said yes, the biggest threat is in the Middle East, but I don't know that that's the case anymore. Also, obviously, there's continued violence in Syria, continued violence. I mean, Turkey has made really big moves. They've made big moves in Turkey, and obviously Libya and elsewhere, and uh, it's it's a big question mark as to what the new Trump administration, how the new Trump administration will address, the role of Erdogan, President Erdogan, as a spoiler. That's the role that he plays. He's like the NATO spoiler. If I feel like if Russia could have picked, a country that would sort of like mess with successfully. I don't think if Russia had planned it, Turkey would have done anything different than they're doing in terms of really scuttling NATO's efficacy and the unity of NATO. NATO is not united at this time, and Turkey's a big reason for that. Some would argue that President Trump is a big reason for that. I don't think President Trump's position on NATO or partnerships or like NATO partner defense budgets has been a secret. He's been pretty consistent for many, many years about his feeling that our NATO partners need to contribute more to their own defense. So I don't think that's news, but it still upsets a lot of people. But there are threats elsewhere. Obviously, the pacing threat to the United States is not in the Middle East. It's China, and that's something that we really can't afford to take our eye off of. But we also haven't been able to give it the focus that it needs because we're constantly distracted with the Middle East, even though we don't want to be, and we're constantly about to pivot to Asia. The reality is we're behind. We're way behind, and we lack capabilities that we might need tomorrow, and it's very sobering. So, and that's one of the reasons why I'm sort of in the business that I'm in now, because I'd like to help. I'd like to try to help bridge that gap and do what I can, use my network and the things that I've learned over the years to try to help. But I think it's also worth noting that we have a resurgence of radical Islam and radical Islamic terrorism. And a lot of people don't realize, for example, that ISIS, which is a big threat again, is now not like the senior leadership is not no longer based in Syria as it was years ago. It's actually based in Somalia now, in the Golis Mountains. And the Biden administration did not really take any decisive action against ISIS in Somalia. The Trump administration has started to, and I hope they continue, because there's a lot of very worrying signals coming from there. And there have been numerous successful, what they call lone wolf attacks across Europe. And of course, we had our own attack here in New Orleans on New Year's Eve. These are all. This is all sort of the same, from the same poison chalice, and we need to figure out a way to deal with this, because it's coming at us in a different way than we are used to. And then we have the whole issue of, you know, an unstable Syria remains unstable. We have the old ISIS prisons, and camps, the that have been there from when we fought the war against ISIS, and now our Kurdish partners, the SDF, have been maintaining these IDP camps, the displaced persons camps, as well as the prisons. And the IDP camps have really been festering. There's a lot of, ISIS family members there who also are radical, and many of the women are actually more radical than the men, and they've been raising their little ISIS babies. And many of us believe this is, the army in waiting for ISIS. And because we, not just us in the US, but our partners and allies who have fought against ISIS in the past, we have a deep fatigue. We fought terrorism for 20 years, and it didn't end well. But the fact of the matter is, it's not over, and it hasn't ended. And unfortunately, the way that we departed Afghanistan sort of left us, it left us weakened, and it left us, not only that, we have encouraged uh, global Islamic terrorism to such a degree that I'm very concerned about what's coming. And I think the first sign of that was the Hamas attacks against Israel on October 7th. 2023. I don't believe that those would have happened without the shame and humiliation of our withdrawal from Afghanistan. I don't want to talk about, like, should we have been there or not. It doesn't matter anymore. But the fact of the matter is, the way that we left really was so encouraging and such a strong sign of victory. It was a Taliban victory, and it was viewed as such by, global terrorism and its supporters. And now we're seeing the results of that, and we will continue to, unfortunately.
I know you mentioned about perhaps like shortcomings and things that the U.S. needs to be more cognizant of and such. Could you share about where the U.S. is perhaps falling behind on, if you can get kind of granular more or less with that, and then uh, perhaps misconceptions that the public may have?
Misconceptions about what? Sorry, can you
Oh,
be more
mis,
specific?
just general public stance on issues over in the Middle East. Some misconceptions that you feel people have or may have that
Sure.
you've encountered, or
Okay, yeah. Thanks for clarifying that. Yeah, I mean, I think that, well, just addressing the second part of your question first. I mean, misconceptions are rampant. I mean, I think so first of all, the way, again, I mean, I'll repeat myself. The way that we withdrew from Afghanistan um was beyond shameful. I don't know. It's hard to find the words to describe how horrific that was. I had the opportunity actually to testify before a House subcommittee about the impact to our homeland security from our withdrawal, from the way that we withdrew from Afghanistan. And I said this was years ago now, and I said at the time, and unfortunately, I I don't think I was wrong that um, we had people streaming out of Afghanistan. Those first flights, by the way, out of Afghanistan from HKIA on our C-17s, we had no idea. I mean, it's well documented. We had no idea who was on those planes, and they ended up, on all the lily pads, and they ended up in the United States. And I don't. I mean, I wasn't in government at the time, and I'm not now, and so I don't know if they ever got a handle on who those people were. I know some of them were rolled up, and they actually were on our watch list, and we brought them into our own country ourselves. Good for us. So, and then I think obviously the open borders policy just from a national security and homeland security perspective, just devastating. And we'll see how successful this administration is going to be at addressing, you know, figuring out who's here and kind of prioritizing rolling them up. How are they going to prioritize that? We're already seeing some activity focused on the cartels that have now been designated as terrorist organizations. But what about, the other terrorist groups, and how are we going to identify who some of the individuals are? It's a it's a work in progress. The answer to that is intel and law enforcement, and that's how that works. Um, so relatedly, I think we mistakenly spent a lot of time labeling the political enemies of the last administration as domestic terrorists and focusing our godlike powers on that issue, where there were a lot of, in my opinion, kind of bigger fish to fry. And so I think we are getting back to not focusing on our fellow Americans as the enemy, but actual people who want to like kill Americans. And now I just want to be clear: I'm not talking about domestic terrorists who are interested in bringing down the government or attacking people or hurting people. Those are, that fits the recognized terminology of a terrorist. So I'm not talking about that. I'm talking more about political opponents, things like that. I'm just in principle, I'm just very opposed to that. I don't like to see it from either side. So I think getting back to the business of keeping Americans safe, of locking up people who wish to do Americans harm. I think that's a first step, and so I think that's I would like to see more of that. So far, you know, so far so good. We're only a few months in, but we need to. There's so much work to do. This is the issue. There's so much work to do because we don't even really know who's here. I think we have some sense in some places, but I think we don't really. There's a lot of work to do. And so I could ramble on about this for a long time, but I'll pause there.
Well, as it relates to people being in the country that shouldn't be here and such, I mean, do you foresee there being some type of act of terrorism or something? I mean, like probability wise or such. I mean, obviously you're more
I
involved
think
in
it's
the
very
trickle.
likely.
Okay.
Unfortunately, I think it's very likely. I know there's some people running around, giving dates and times and weirdly being like, it's going to be here, it's going to be this. Maybe they know something I don't know, but I think yeah, there is a high likelihood. We should act like there is a high likelihood, um, because we don't know who came into our country, and what we do know is very alarming. The people that we do know, the people that have been identified, the how many there are and how many came in, especially in like the last year or two, is incredibly alarming. And so I mean, we know almost like 200 people on our terrorist watch list entered through the southern border, um last, I believe, in the last 2 years alone. So that's, that's what we know. That's only what we know. And so that's really where I start to get concerned, because again, there were so many gotaways, and we don't know who those people were.
I see. And as it relates to the U.S. defense and security strategy, what do you think needs to evolve the most in the coming decade?
Sorry, I'm plugging in my computer.
No
Very
worries.
very unprofessional.
All good. Don't sweat it. Makes it more real, anyways.
So sorry, what's to come? Say that again.
But yeah, so my question was, where do you think U.S. defense and security strategy needs to evolve most in the coming decade?
Well, I think there's a general recognition that the status quo doesn't really work. Um, that if we just carry on as we have been, more bad things are bound to happen. So it's an exciting time in a way because of all of this new technology that's being developed right now. It has enabled it's enabled us to do so many new things that we weren't able to do before. And I genuinely think it will result in greatly improved security for us. Um, it also means that whatever privacy we think we have left, I don't think it bodes well for that because a lot of this technology relies on data collection, and not just collecting, what you type into a computer. It's facial recognition. Now we have gait recognition, and it's not just from, cameras on a street pole, it's from space. And space is being weaponized. Space has been weaponized, but a lot of people don't recognize that yet. And we also have the advent of autonomous vehicles, and that's anything from drones, and drones that are, big and expensive and can carry huge payloads, and drones that are small, FPV drones, quadcopters that can carry a grenade and kill you just the same. And all of these videos that we've seen coming out of Ukraine, of the manhunting that's been done by both the Russians and the Ukrainians using this type of technology. Very cheap, very, commercial, off the shelf, very deadly. And once you introduce AI and kind of a hive mind to that, it becomes a big threat. And so it becomes a threat if it's after you, but it can become a big, it's it's a big benefit if you're the one, with the joystick. So, or behind the keyboard. So that's, it's the nature of warfare. People say this every generation, every couple of years. Actually, not even every generation. It's like every couple of years. The nature of warfare has changed. I mean, the weapons are different. The nature of warfare is still the same, um, in my opinion. But at and so I believe that at a strategic level, the goals still need to be the same. However, the way that you achieve those goals and the tactics that you use to achieve those goals is different now and will continue um, to change very, very rapidly. The pace of change is I mean, change. How do you say this? The pace of change is increasing rapidly. So that's what we're facing. And I often wonder, what is the world for my nieces and nephews that are all under 10 years old right now? What is the world going to be like for them when they're our age? I don't know that it would be recognizable to us today, but just like, our grandparents, would they recognize the world today, if they were still here? So, but it is, we're hitting up against quantum as well, which I think is worth discussing. I think whoever cracks quantum might win, because you kind of, um, the speed at which you can conduct, it's the speed of computing. Once you have a quantum computer, passwords are no longer relevant. When you have kind of a AI, you have machine versus machine. If you have one machine that's quantum and one that's not, it's no contest. And the reason for that is computing speed. Just The computing speed is, it's not even comparable. So nation states are working very, very hard to crack quantum, and some have lied and said they've done it already. I don't believe anyone has yet, but they're close. How close remains to be seen, but that will be another game changer. That will be a game changer like AI. And people don't even yet realize how game changing AI is. I mean, we, I don't want to get into a philosophy, but the, the nature of how we live is going to be different in the near future, I believe.
Yeah, I was going to add, it is because you mentioned about, kind of history and change and such, and just some comments. I do think it is fascinating how pre really the last 100 years or so, which really isn't that long ago in the grand scheme of time, people kind of lived the way they've lived for the past 5,000 years, more or less: horse, buggy, sustenance farming, things of that nature. And then, of course, we don't know what's going on today. And I always find it also interesting, not that you conveyed this, but just in general, when people talk about how it's like the world is so crazy and dangerous, and sure there's unknowns and such, but I think relative to previous eras where you have, another army just rolling through the countryside, so like parts of Europe for most of history, or parts of Asia. It's like we live in, it's not bad, it's relative to those other periods. And it will be interesting, to your point, with AI, with quantum computing, where that's going to take us.
Yeah, I mean, I think previously, if a nation was at war, everyone in the country had some role to play in that. And the way that we prosecuted the GWAT was, I think, the first real war that America was in, where it wasn't like, the whole country wasn't paying attention. I mean, that was my observation anyway. I mean, even in Vietnam, well, Vietnam, there was a draft, so you couldn't escape it. Obviously, we prosecuted the global war on terror with an all volunteer force, and so that was different. So it was, some families bore the brunt of that and were broken by that. Even those who, service members who returned from combat, a lot of families were destroyed because of the number of deployments and the damage that, those extended separations do to families. And then on top of it, any, the mental wounds of battle, things like that. So, no, I think that was, if we ever want to do a truthful look back, I think that was one of the problems that with the way that we fought that war was those wars. Number one, Iraq. Why? And I was someone who was really radicalized by 9/11. We lost one of my mother's best friends was on the plane that hit the Pentagon, and that was what motivated me to volunteer for government service. And actually, I have two younger brothers. They both served in the Marine Corps, and I don't. It changed our lives, and we felt obligated to serve. But it it and I volunteered to go to Iraq because I drank the Kool-Aid. But now in retrospect, it's a cautionary tale. I look back to those days and think about everything that I saw during those years and what's happened since, and I understand. Now we're going through a period of kind of isolationism. We have a very strong isolationist elements of this administration, which I'm not an isolationist, but I understand where that comes from and the desire to be like, this doesn't affect us. We don't need to mess with that. Unfortunately, and I don't mean this with respect to Iraq. I don't, again, in retrospect, the argument was that it was tied to 9/11. That Saddam Hussein had nuclear weapons, and they were going to attack the U.S. Something like that. I don't even know anymore, to be honest with you. The rhetoric from that time was so. If you listen to any of those speeches today, by the way, that like Colin Powell or any of those folks made in the run up to the invasion of Iraq, if you listen to those speeches today, you would be shocked. I recently heard some of them. I went back because I'm working on a personal project, and I just I sat and listened to it. I'm like, wow, I believed this. That's really crazy. I think I'm a smart person, but I was completely radicalized and by the events of 9/11, and I don't say that in I mean, I think a lot of us were. We were motivated to serve, and I was motivated to try to make sure nothing like that ever happened again. That was my motivation. So I'm not sure if it's fair to say I was radicalized, but I certainly was motivated, and I think that because of this, my generation, the GWAT generation, who served, who were part of this all volunteer force and spent years of our lives overseas in this battle. I think at minimum, there should be an accounting, and there should be um, some sort of honest look back at exactly what happened. Now, I know there was a very deep review that the U.S. Army did. They actually wrote, I think there's a published book about it, lessons learned from Iraq, and I think it was very thorough and very interesting, and contains a lot of useful information. But we still don't have one about Afghanistan, and I would really like to see one come out. And I would also like to see somebody pursue accountability for what happened, and again, the way that we withdrew, because I don't think that we can start to regain I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, but I just don't think we can move forward without accountability, because there's so many questions that are left. And frankly, there are a lot of people who are responsible for terrible, terrible decisions who are now, talking heads on TV and on boards and things like that. And maybe they shouldn't be as respected as they are. Maybe the truth about the decisions that they made should face the light of day. But a lot of people, when I start talking about this, a lot of people get uncomfortable and want to move on, and I understand that it is uncomfortable. And you know, um, in the defense community, a lot of people work together, and um, now it's business, and but I think some things transcend that, and I still would like to see accountability for some of these things. But I also, I think it's important to take the lessons from those years and from those decisions and apply them to the situation that we face today. So I'm glad to see we're not putting troops in Ukraine. We shouldn't put troops in Ukraine. Um, but should we completely, acquiesce to everything that Russia wants? I mean, I don't support that either. When people were, by the way, I declined. I had a lot of opportunities to go do media appearances about Ukraine, and I have always declined because, well, first of all, things get edited, and you know, tight edits of longer statements can be misconstrued if you remove context. So, I'm not comfortable with that, but I think it's important. I mean, what Russia's invasion of Ukraine was criminal, and um, I don't think it's wrong to say that. I think it's also important to note that Ukraine has a big problem with corruption, and just sending, based on my experience having worked on the Iraqi currency exchange, I can tell you it's not a good idea to just send pallets of cash to a country like that does not have strict controls. And so it just became kind of crazy. At least in DC, you couldn't, by even raising the question about, well, what sort of controls are there on US taxpayer dollars that are going to Ukraine, immediately you're like, oh, you like Putin, oh, you support Russia. So it's pretty difficult for reasonable people to speak right now, and it has been for a little while now. So that's okay. I mean, I think the American people voted for President Trump. I voted for President Trump. I support a lot of what this administration is doing. I'm certainly glad that we don't have a continuation of the disastrous policies of the Biden administration, or God forbid, something worse. But eventually, the Democrats will win again. And I think, I hope, as we watch the pendulum, the pendulum swings back and forth. I would like to see less variability, not more. But unfortunately, I don't see things headed that way. And so, if we're talking about risks, I think that is another risk, and I think that our partners and allies are looking at that as well. That the policies and foreign policies and economic policies of the Trump administration today, how long will they really be in place? And is that something, as an American partner or an American ally, do we address that, or do we wait it out? Do we get what we can from from this administration, or just kind of sit tight? And I think you see how our different partners and allies have chosen. I mean, it's becoming pretty clear, at least to me, kind of who's in favor and who's not. And I also think it's not rocket science. It's pretty obvious who benefits, and who doesn't. The problem to me is that we can't change our entire foreign policy every 4 to 8 years. That causes instability, and that also causes us. It causes instability for us and for our partners and allies who have looked to the United States as a
Anchor.
as a force for stability and an example of stability. And if they don't know kind of which way the wind blows here politically, um, I never want China to be a more palatable option than the United States of America. And I actually do think long term, I know it's a little rocky right now. I do believe that long term, um, we can become that. But I already am kind of looking to the future. Who's next? What's next? And I would like to see more less variability in our foreign policy and more stability, like I said. But unfortunately, um, I'm not sure that that will be the case. We'll have to wait and see.
I mean, obviously, Trump can't run a third term, although there's been, talk he's been wanting to explore that route. But I mean, I guess I'm just trying to think of how else do you ensure more stability? Of course, if you're only in for 4 years with the assumption, you know what I mean? So I'm just kind of curious to get your thoughts on what the
Guess what
country
I'm
should do.
talking about. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I guess what I'm talking about is the fact that previously, and really prior to the Obama administration, there were certain kind of agreed upon US foreign policy truths that really did not change with the change in, like, really a domestic political change. That was really um I guess that's overstating it, but to a great degree, I mean, so you have this variability, let's say Jimmy Carter to Ronald Reagan, huge shift, right, in foreign policy. You had this like peace through strength approach from Reagan, that everyone was against, but eventually toppled the Soviet Union because we just simply outspent them in defense. And it's funny because I'm the daughter of an old Cold Warrior, and I remember when the Soviet Union fell, and I remember how there were so many people who had um, criticized the Reagan administration and its officials for what they were doing and mocking it, saying like, "Oh, you just want to outspend them, like it's not going to work." Well, lesson learned. It worked. Peace through strength worked. Um, but uh, then we saw, and we saw this shift. The 70s under Carter, was a lot of sort of negative stuff. A lot of people have compared that time to the Biden administration, and there are some parallels there. Um, is Trump a Reagan, a Reaganite figure? Uh, I mean, I think there are arguments against that. I think there are definitely some comparisons that can be made. Like they're both not, well, Trump especially was not a career politician, and Reagan had served as governor of California, but was an actor in a previous life. So they were both in entertainment for a while before they started running for office. I'm not a presidential historian, but I can. So I'm sure smarter people than me can come up with parallels or not, as the case may be. But I think you could make an argument. They definitely have some similarities, but at their core, to me, um, you you need to have some sort of like core elements of U.S. foreign policy that don't change regardless of who's in power. For example, we used to have a policy of we don't negotiate with terrorists. if you take hostages, we are not going to negotiate we're not going to trade you. We're not going to pay for them. We're not going to, you know, has that changed? I question if that still is the case. Um, and that's also that's very damaging as well, because obviously every time you pay a ransom, you encourage further hostage taking. And it's very hard to say that to a family member of a hostage. And it's easy to have a policy when you're not dealing with specific people and human life at stake and all of that. There's a lot of emotion tied to all of that, and rightly so. But when you take a step back and you look at the fact that not, not paying ransoms does tells potential hostage takers they're not going to make money from that activity, and they're probably going to get killed by, someone from our an unnamed U.S. military task force. Like, they're less likely to take hostages, U.S. hostages, in the first place. That's just one example of something that is beneficial for the United States, no matter what party is in charge. And there are other examples of this type of thing that have really, over the years, kind of been pushed to the wayside. There were a lot of decisions made under the Obama administration that sort of changed the status quo, and we've never really returned there. And that happened right as people, with the advent of the internet, got access to information that they'd never had before. We have information at our fingertips that's never been available before to us. And once we realized that these trusted elite institutions, including our own government, were in some cases lying to us, there was a deep trust that was lost, and that allowed for a Trump to take office, because he was the loudest voice. Like, you've been lied to, you've been taken advantage of, and the majority of American voters agreed with him. So, in terms of sort of what does that mean for the future, are we going to continue this MAGA populist movement? Are there going to be additional politicians that fall under that umbrella who will win elections? I don't think there's another Donald Trump. But I don't know who his successor is, and if that person will be as successful as he's been, but also what their plan would be, for a future American foreign policy. Because, like I said, I mean, I think that an isolationist perspective is very dangerous and has not ended well for us in the past. We've been forced into several conflicts because we refuse to engage early. And I really hope that doesn't come to pass in the future as well.
That reminds me of course, World War I, World War II. I have personally kind of teeter-tottered, and as it relates to how involved the U.S. should be. And I wanted to echo something you mentioned earlier, Simone, about your radicalism, if you will, in terms of Iraq and things of that nature. And I, of course, I mentioned off camera, and the audience probably knows I was in the Navy at one point, about not quite. I joined almost 10 years ago. It's so interesting to see my own transformation, because while I am obviously supportive of the men and women in uniform and such, and I take a peace through strength mindset, I also see the involvement in things not just with Iraq and Afghanistan, but also just so many wars and conflicts in general that are just so um, misguided. And I'm not going to pretend like I'm like privy to certain information over others, but I just wonder why we were there. I mean, in Smedley Butler's right, Wars of Racket comes to mind, and yeah, less of the Kool-Aid for me as well. I'm kind of like,
I
so
think that's the majority of the American people because we've seen the truth now. And whether or not everyone saw it, I saw it in a pretty hands-on way. Not everyone did, and frankly, I'm grateful for that. But um, I think it's clear that what we were told and what we trusted was not the truth, and no one really knows. I mean, it's hard to because they do a good job of hiding who they are, and there are a few people that you can point to and be like, well, that was a spokesperson for this. But how did this come to be? How did we get here? How did that strike that CENTCOM took? I still wonder about this. And sorry for harping on Afghanistan, but I'm not over it. The strike that CENTCOM took a couple of days after the Abbey Gate suicide attack that killed 13 U.S. service members, and hundreds of Afghans. Um, they CENTCOM at the time announced that it was, the terrorists that had planned that attack, and it turned out later it was a family. It was, you know, uh, it was not whatever CENTCOM said it was, and that was like the end. I think they did an investigation, determined there was no fault, paid out some money to the remaining family members, and just like called it a day. That's not acceptable. That's not acceptable. And I wish that people who are so angry about so many things, like, demand an answer for that. Demand some kind of accountability. Because when you don't, they get away with it, and it does no good for me to come on here and talk about my feelings. Like, people need to be angry and actually demand accountability, because this was all funded by the taxpayer, and the taxpayer deserves an answer. And by the way, so do the 13 Gold Star families. That's what I think.
absolutely, absolutely. Simone, is there anything else that you would like to convey to the audience, or perhaps anything else that doesn't receive enough attention as we wrap up?
I Yeah, I would just like to talk about the epidemic of veteran suicide, and I really appreciated some remarks that were made recently by the new VA secretary um, about that problem, and about the amount of money that's been spent to quote unquote solve the suicide problem, and yet the number of veteran suicides hasn't changed. I think this is a really important issue, and I think it is tied to this question of accountability. I do think a lot of people just feel that uh, many years of sacrifice and hardship were wasted, losing friends, losing families broken apart, and I think that's part of it. Obviously, there are many other issues at play, and a lot of people have individual challenges, but this situation, the status quo, is not acceptable, and so I one of the things that I would really like to see in the next couple of years is a direct focus with results on how can we ameliorate this problem. What more can we do for veterans to support them? And I know one of the challenges is you get out of the service and you're no longer part of something bigger than yourself, and it can feel very lonely. And so I think there are a number of organizations that are there to help people, but a lot of people don't want to ask for help, or have a lot of reasons why this group or that group or those people, or him, her, etc. I just hope we have more and more veterans who give themselves the grace to ask for help. And I know there are a lot of people who want to help and who understand what they're going through. And yeah, so it's a very personal issue for me. And so I'd also encourage anyone else listening, like, just reach out to your buddies, check up on people. You'll never regret doing that, but you could regret not doing it. So yeah, thank
I
you.
second that. There was a gentleman I didn't know he had passed until actually a couple of years later. I had a buddy send me a message. It was an obituary, and I was like, "What the heck?" And it was somebody that I was in boot camp with in the Navy, and he took his life during COVID. So it was like the perfect storm, right? It's you're getting out. He was in a program, much like myself, that didn't work out. Depressed about it, and now you've got COVID, right? So you're sequestered and you're in this lockdown, and then young men in general are already going through a mental health crisis. I think men just, I mean, a
Yeah.
lot of, not to just make it about men, but I
Yes.
like there's a lot of mental
Yes.
health stuff going around just in general. So it's just this perfect breeding ground, social media, and something's in your face and this or that. And so I wish I didn't really know him that well, but I wish I had been aware that he was struggling, because I would have driven over. He lived few hours away from me. I would have driven over there and you know done what was
Yeah.
needed. But yeah,
I hear you. I hear you. Um, I have someone in mind too talking about this, and yeah, I just didn't know. I just didn't know. So, um, anyway, well, I'm so grateful for this time with you today. This has been tremendous.
absolutely. And Simone, how can people get in touch with you and learn more about you?
Well, I have a website, simoneledeen.com. I'm also on X at Simone Ledeen, and I'm also on LinkedIn if people want to find me there. I publish in all those places. Yeah, I post all my content to my website. I have a YouTube page as well, but all of those videos are also tied to my website. So, yeah, I mean, engage me. I'm always available to talk to people, and I love connecting. So thank you. Thanks
Awesome.
for the
Thanks.
opportunity.
Thanks so much for being on, Simone.